Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon. You always have a slight sinking feeling in your heart when you're asked to do the final session after lunch on the last day. When you think, oh my God, half of them will have decided I've had enough and gone home. The others, the hangovers are just kicking in. They dim the lights, you snuggle back comfortably in your chairs, and within a few minutes you're all fast asleep. Well, the lights are dim, so I actually can't see you out there. But you all look relatively awake. I was on a flight the other day where, as we approached takeoff, they said, oh, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to dim the lights in the cabin. This is normal practice in hours of darkness and is intended to make the cabin crew more attractive. You all look extremely attractive this afternoon. A little bit about us has already been explained. We're working quite a lot internationally. Creative Partnerships and Find Your Talent were two programs that we used to run in England, but following the general election and the economic crisis, our funding was withdrawn. But it's Creative Partnerships in particular, which is I'm going to focus on in this program, is attracted a lot of international attention because of the scale of it. And we've had a lot of interest from governments in different places in the world, have now designed and started to deliver programs in many other countries. And I'm going to talk about those during the course of this presentation. So firstly, why has creativity become so important? I was visiting a secondary school of ours a few months ago, and I was looking at some work that they'd done as part of the Creative Partnerships program, and at the end, they said, oh, there's this 16-year-old lad who's making a short film about creative partnerships, and he'd like to interview you for a few minutes, ask you some questions. Is that all right? And I said, fine. And they took me into the head teacher's office, and he was there, and he had a camera lined up. And I sat down, he asked me some questions, I went away, and thought no more about it. But about 4 weeks later, I got a video, DVD in the post, and this is what was on it.
Creative Partnerships.
Sound?
At its heart, Creative Partnerships is about making education a better experience for young people and making sure that they leave school with a set of skills that are going to set them up properly to be a success in the 21st century. Ultimately, if Creative Partnerships is going to have a long-term impact, then it is going to be an impact on teachers, because we can't forever be in schools doing that. What we have to do is to be able to work with teachers and bring around changes in what they do. If you get the right creative process going and you step on the outside and you're watching people, then people are at their most alive when they're doing that. They're completely focused, engaged in this different place. And it's that look of absolute rapt fascination that you get across people's faces that makes it all worthwhile. And you think, that's absolutely living, actually.
Can't see the resemblance myself. The significant thing about this story is a few weeks later, I was having a meeting with the heads of some of our biggest advertising agencies. And advertising is a very significant part of the economy in England. It creates a lot of jobs. They're very well-paid jobs. They're fun jobs. Lots and lots of people want to do them. And the purpose of this meeting was to look at pathways into advertising for children, young people from less well-off backgrounds, because the profile of the kind of people who get jobs in advertising tend to be people from much better off backgrounds. And the directors of the advertising agencies were saying, well, it's very difficult for us. Every time we advertise a post, even if it's a receptionist, we get over 1,000 applicants. You need a really good degree even to get an interview. A lot of young people work for 2 years on internships for no money just in order to build up a CV so they can get a job. And a lot of these jobs are in London. To live for 2 years in London with no money, you've got to come from a rich background. And they were basically saying, you know, it's hopeless. And at the end I said, okay, but can I just show you a video? And I showed them that video. And they all wanted the boy's telephone number because they were going to ring him up and offer him a job there and then, even though he comes from Northumberland, well to the north in England. But what was really interesting to me is that they didn't know they wanted him until they saw that video. And this is a fundamental change in the paradigm of employment from what there was before. What there was before is there were employers who knew what they were looking for, and they talked to education or other trainers and said, this is what I want, and education supplied. But the paradigm has completely changed. That the reason there are such high levels of unemployment amongst young people isn't entirely to do with skills and other things. It's that in the future world, they actually have to invent their own jobs. There's a British government statistic, and nobody knows how they calculated it, but you know that fundamentally it's true, which is 60% of the jobs kids in school today will do have not yet been invented. And this poses a huge challenge for education, because what is it that you teach people if you have no idea what they're going to do? And not only have they not been invented, but everybody is going to do several jobs at the same time, portfolio working as they call it, or several jobs in sequence, but it's not the kind of world where you leave education knowing the stuff you need to know to work and then doing that for the rest of your life. And most of all, what the world is looking for is job seekers and is not job seekers but job creators. I'll give you an example of the way the world works now, because it's both good and it's bad. I was talking to a young entrepreneur in Latvia at a dinner, and I said, what do you do? And he said, oh, I do several different things. And I said, well, give me an idea. He said, well, I've got one business, which is the kind of Amazon of chemical engineering. And I said, oh, well, tell me about it. He said, well, I had this idea that in chemistry research is always trying to come up with new compounds, and they do a lot of theoretical research, and when they've worked it out, they think, all right, I'll now make that compound, see if it works. And they get all the elements, and they try and combine them. Well, this guy worked out that most of the combinations probably already existed, because someone tried something similar, and it was sitting in a test tube in their lab. So he thought, what I'll do is I'll create a website in which researchers, PhD students, professors can list all the compounds they have lying around, not sure what to do with, and other people can just go onto the website when they're looking for particular combinations and acquire them. So he got a website design company in Casablanca to do the website. He went to Oxford and found a very eminent chemistry professor and said, look, I need somebody to front this and say it's a really good idea and have the photograph at the front. And the guy said, I think it's a brilliant idea. I'll front it so that people think it's kosher. And he got some people in Hong Kong to write the finance bit at the back, because obviously everybody bought these compounds. And he launched it, and now it's an absolute standard mechanism, and it ticks along in the background. He doesn't have to do much. He takes a percentage of all the sales, and it earns him money. Now, it's a brilliant idea. It's terribly, terribly simple. The thing about the world now is you can have these ideas anywhere in the world. In the old days, economies could only grow in places there was resources and capital. But now you just need ideas. For Scotland, I think this is a really great moment, because you can go, actually being small is great. It's the real opportunity now. The bigger countries struggle in those things, in these ways. And for young people, growing up today is probably the most exciting time ever to grow up, because you have the ability to invent your own career and your own future. But you can only do it if you have the skills in order to be able to do that. And if you don't have the skills, the world's just not interested anymore, because those non-skilled jobs, the ones that you could expect to be out there, just aren't out there anymore. So what is going on in schools today? This isn't a reflection on Scotland. I've hardly ever been to Scotland. This is more about some of the other countries I've worked in, particularly in England, in the Asia-Pacific region, other countries in Europe. I'll start to illustrate it by a short animation made by some young people in a creative partnership school in Liverpool. They made a 17-minute film about their school's journey through creative partnerships to becoming a very creative school. And this opening scene is before they went on their creative curriculum. Because the film was made in Liverpool, we've put English subtitles on it for you.
Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived.
You getting all this down? Oops, forgot you can't. Miss Mars, what planet's she on? See what I did there? Suppose.
No way is this fair. I only come in for art.
Call that a proper subject. Say hello to the real world, Charlotte. History. Something tangible. Something with facts. Something with categories.
History is so last year.
Whoa, tramp cracked a funny.
Moron.
Freak.
History does my head in, makes it explode. Don't get it.
Perhaps I should fashion you a hat like Henry's, with an N on it, for nincompoop.
I'm not stopping here.
Sit!
Who can tell me the name of one of Henry VIII's mistresses during his marriage to Catherine of Aragon?
Your mum?
Not historically accurate, Gary. There were said to be at least 2 mistresses.
It's actually a very finely observed little piece of animation. And I think many of you teachers may have recognized some of those classrooms. I particularly like the headmaster's impersonation of Michael Gove, which is very convincing. And this notion of a real subject. It has facts and categories and so forth, which so much dominates the debate in England at the moment. But there are some real lessons in there to sort of capture. And I want to reflect a bit on PISA, which you all know is the tests that 15, 16-year-olds across the developed world take in science, maths, and literacy at the age of 15 and 16. We've been working quite closely with the OECD and the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation, who are responsible for PISA. And they are very concerned that PISA is not well understood. And this is a set of slides, essentially, that I got from them, which explains what their concerns are. It's about the issues of motivation. What most people don't know is that in addition to doing the tests in maths, science, and literacy, all these pupils are also tested on how interested they are in the subject and how confident they are in the subject. And the reason they're tested on interest and confidence is the predictor of you going on to study those is interest and confidence and not your test scores. So whilst having done this analysis, they then produce correlations between interest and test scores and confidence and test scores, which they call the test score interest self-concept paradox, which is presumably why nobody's ever heard of it. But it looks like this. So up the left-hand side, you have interest in science topics, and along the bottom, you have the science scores. And the little dots are the countries who've taken the test, the average scores. And we all know that Finland always wins this competition with the best scores. But what the research shows is that Finnish pupils are the least interested in science, and as a consequence will not go on to study science at university or pursue science careers. And since our desire to educate young people in the sciences is related to our need for scientists, the fact that the way we teach them actually succeeds in turning them off the subject as they get more successful is a matter of real concern. They also correlated confidence, which they call self-concept, how good you think you are on this subject, with the test scores. And again, it looks like this. On the far left, you have Japan and Korea, who do really, really well in the test scores, but actually have no confidence in the subjects. And when you go to Japan and Korea, and I spent quite a lot of time there last year, and you go into the classroom, you can see why. The dominant pedagogy in the classroom is entirely transmissive. The teacher is there, often with a microphone, belting facts out to you, and you are desperately trying to learn these facts. Now, young Koreans work incredibly hard. In the high schools that I was visiting, students turn up at 7:30 and work till 1:30 the next morning in this atmosphere, which is just about consuming and regurgitating facts. And in fact, every single classroom I went into had children fast asleep. And in the classrooms, they have these big desks at the back, which are desks but on tall legs. And I said to the head teacher, why is that? He said, oh, because we have this big problem about sleep, then if you go and stand at a desk, you're less likely to fall asleep. So we have all these desks so that people can just try and keep awake. But the consequence of this is they get these very high test scores, but they come out believing they are no good at the subject. Because what they think is, I can't be any good, because if I was any good, it wouldn't have been this hard. I wouldn't have had to work this hard in such a boring way for such a long time in order to end up being any good at the subject. And therefore, there is a clear relationship with how you teach it and the extent to which you are able to give young people a confidence and interest in that subject. And without the confidence and interest, actually, it's self-defeating. This is another piece of research on PISA, which is done by a Chinese professor. It's only just been published. And here they're correlating PISA math scores with perceived entrepreneurial capability. So everybody knows in the developed world that we need far more entrepreneurs, we need more creative people, we need them to have all these wonderful ideas and implement them. And again, you see this extraordinary cross-correlation between high test scores and entrepreneurial capability. I am actually half Greek, so I'm allowed to say this. I was particularly amused by Greece there. They've got lots of wonderful ideas but can't add up, which we kind of know, don't we? But the consequence of all this is very negative on the young people in the system. This is a recent book by an American professor who's observing that there is a negative correlation between students' confidence in their mathematical ability and their math scores, the point that I was already making, sees it, an even stronger negative correlation showing the less their enjoyment of maths, the higher their math scores. Now, this is really concerning. If we really want them to engage with maths, they have to enjoy it. And it's amazing how often when I show this particular slide, people come up to me afterwards and go, you know, that was me. I did engineering and I hated it. I got great scores, but I absolutely hated it. And the moment I could stop, I stopped. And that can't be the way that we educate people. We've done a big well-being survey with the Institute of Education from Cambridge, and we surveyed 5,000 young people in schools. And what you have here in the graph is the numbers along the bottom of the year they're in, year 3, year 6, year 8, year 10, and then you have up there their life satisfaction scores. It was a very robust questionnaire that they used, and I think it's very effective. And it shows very clearly that as kids go through the education system, they get more and more miserable. Now, I'm the first to accept that in those years 6, 8, and 10 in school, a lot of other stuff is going on. You're becoming an adolescent, you're growing up, and so on and so forth. But that can't be a good direction for the feelings of our young people to be. And this one, which I particularly like because it felt so authentic, was about competence. How competent do they feel? In England, year 6 is your last year in primary school. So what you have here is that from year 3 to 6, it goes up, because in year 6 is the best you probably feel, because you're faster, clever, quicker than everybody else in school. And then you go to secondary school, and everyone else is bigger and faster, and therefore your sense of competence is undermined. I also feel very authentic that the blue is boys, the girls is green. Boys always tend to think they're better than they really are. Girls do the opposite. So it kind of feels very authentic as it comes through. But it actually can't be a good thing that as kids go through school, they feel less good about themselves, less good about their lives. The consequence, and this is an OECD slide, I make no apologies for it, I didn't invent it. They've done the same thing with science scores and youth suicide rates, and they've said that's the correlation. You see Korea right at the top, Finland really near the top of that. And these are young people. And when I was in Korea, we talked about this quite a lot. And the Korean education system and head teachers know about this, and they talk about it. And they say, yes, and actually, the suicide rate is highest amongst the higher achievers, and so forth. So it's the people who, came third as opposed to came first tend to do it. The people at the bottom don't tend to have the same concern. And the OECD has done another study just for Korea on well-being in Korea, and they estimate that Korean children are the least happy in the world. And I was talking to a head teacher, and I said, but when you read this, what do you think? And he started to cry and said, I can't bear it. Now, their education system is an extreme, but there are aspects of what goes on in their pedagogy which I think there are people who want to replicate here. I certainly know in England, Michael Gove goes on about Korea and how wonderful it is, and I thought you should just go there and talk to the pupils and talk to the teachers about what's going on. So, how does a creative education help? So this is really about our approach to creative education and what we've tried to do. And I think the best way of starting this is to go back to the UNESCO definitions of education, where they have the 4 pillars of education: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. And what we have in England and in Korea and in Japan and quite a lot in China is this obsession with the first 2. You go to school to acquire knowledge and develop certain skills. And the latter 2, which is you learn to discover who you are and how you function and how you work. And secondly, you learn to work out where you fit into society and who it is that you want to work with and how that actually works, should be fundamental parts of the education system. And I don't see it as, oh, are you talking about additional subjects which you have to teach to do it? Our mantra has always been, it's not about what you teach, it's about how you teach, and it's possible to teach all subjects achieving that. This is a diagram which really I borrowed from Charlie Ledbetter, who was Tony Blair's advisor on education in number 10 when Blair was there. And it's a quadrant which I think illustrates what we've been trying to do. You get low-performing schools down there. And the system, the education system with low-performing schools, what they do when they intervene is they try and move them up there. So they turn them into schools which have high test scores. They're very high systems, so there's very structured curriculum, there's lots of testing, the lesson plans are absolutely rigid, and so on and so forth. Very, very high system. But the test scores come at the expense of independence and motivation. Down here, what you get is lots of cultural artistic activities, which are enjoyable, but the way they're structured into the education system is that they're not impacting directly in learning. And in fact, in a lot of schools that we worked in England to begin with, we found that schools actually were happy going, no, we'll do culture on a Friday afternoon because that's your reward for having to put up with this awful education which you've got the rest of the time. And it's that juxtaposition. And we get, no, it doesn't have to be like that. You can get schools up into that space which are highly enjoyable, invigorating, engaging to the children, but are still high system schools. You're not going, oh, we're not going to care about tests anymore. You don't have to learn anything and so forth. No, you keep all that right integrated in the core of it, but you make it central to what you do. And this takes you from a low-functioning to a high-functioning continuum, which I will explain. We've done a lot of research, I'll mention some of it briefly, on the impact of creative partnerships in schools and so forth. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we particularly looked at not did it work, because the evidence was it did, but how did it work? What was it that was going on in the classroom that made a difference to the outcomes of young people? And this is a kind of little chart of managing the classroom. And I should say to start off with, I'm not saying all left is bad and all right is good and you just go there. You need both. But what happens in a lot of traditional education systems is there is a big focus on this and hardly any of that. So I'll pull off some of these examples quickly. The role of the teacher. In the literature and in the studies that our researchers did in watching in schools, they're quite critical of what they call the guided teacher. So the guided teacher has a very strong lesson plan. The point of this lesson is to learn this fact or this series of facts. And I will start off at the beginning of the lesson guiding you towards it. But my measure of success is by the end of it, you found it, right? But if you don't find it, then I'll guide you towards it. And it has a really negative impact for 2 reasons. Less able students actually only learn to be able to do it when the teacher is there doing the guiding. And therefore, take away the teacher, it falls apart. More able students work out that the teacher is going to tell me the answer at some point. So in a 45-minute lesson, if I wake up at minute 37, I'll get the 1 minute of real learning that I have to do, and I can then go back to sleep again. The nature of the activities. That the activities are very authentic, the kids feel they're real. And there's a big debate about what you mean about feeling they're real, but they do. The organization is flexible rather than bell-bound. The organization of the space it's around workshops, and it's focused on tasks as opposed to focused on the teacher. There's a lot of group working. The visibility of processes. So a lot of working class, you take notes, you write them down, and sometimes your teacher sees them, sometimes your teacher doesn't. We favor setting tasks where the children or the pupils are going to result in something they're going to have to share in a high-profile way. High profile raises the risk, and risk is scary, but risk introduces motivation. And particularly, for instance, in teenage boys, A lot of teaching is too boring, it's just not risky enough, and they're all adrenaline freaks. And there are ways of building into the learning quite a lot of adrenaline to make it do. The emotion is acknowledged, and I'll talk more about that a bit later. They're highly mobile. So you work in the class, you're wandering around, you use the passageways, you use the grounds of the school, you go out, and so on and so forth. You're very mobile in the way you move. You are a central part of the learning resources. It's not a system which says, leave yourself at the gate, everything you need to know I've got in here. It goes, no, you're absolutely central to that. It's inclusive, and the way you design the class is everybody is going to have a contribution to do it. And you end up with self-managing children, which is the children who will go on to succeed in university and so forth, as opposed to directed ones. They describe, the researchers from this, is that pattern of classroom design, if you like, ends up with high-functioning children. And what they mean is you're socially engaged, you're working with other children, you're emotionally engaged, you're physically engaged, you're intellectually engaged, you're all engaged. And when you get children and pupils to that stage, they feel really good. You feel good when you're firing on all cylinders. You don't actually feel good slumped on a sofa watching television. You all know that. You feel lousy, if you see what I mean. It's only using a tiny part of you. That well-being gives you a sense of confidence and belief in yourself. You're feeling good, and it makes you feel you have agency. You have control, and because you feel you have control, you take control, and having taken control, and with that confidence, and with your own motivation and engagement, you get to high performance. And that's what you're looking for in the children. Now, you can get to good test scores other ways, but high performance, which is what you really want from young people, goes through that. So let's take a few examples that we've worked on in schools. I shall return briefly to our school in Liverpool. This is a scene after the creative curriculum has been introduced.
Here we are then, sweethearts. First day of the creative curriculum. Not the Tudors. Again. Who wants to be Jane Seymour?
That'll be Henry.
I will. I think our Henry should be the Henry.
What about me, miss?
Chief torturer and bully. Thomas Cromwell, perhaps, Gary?
Safe. Do I get to chop off heads?
What does Henry VIII say?
I'd have to pass a law.
Pass it, man, pass it.
Miss, you should try a hat on.
Yeah, miss, go for it.
Do you think I might? Epic, miss. Here, Henry. More your style.
Don't have a style, miss.
You do now.
Now, one of the things I should say about these kids is I never met them, and we never gave them training in our theory, if you see what I mean. They did a 17-minute film about their school's journey, animated like that, in 3 days at the end of a summer term as an exercise. But there is so much in there that they have observed. And I could go through it almost frame by frame. One of the things that's happened is all the desks have gone. So there isn't me, desk, you, the teacher. They're all standing up. They're physically engaged in the process. Everyone is asking questions, and decision-making has been distributed across the classroom. Everybody's taking decisions in that process. And it's a highly empathetic environment where everybody's being supported. And it's very different from the environment in the first one, where everybody was being horrible to each other. And they have a natural sense of effective pedagogies, I find in my experience. They capture it in the film very well. This is a project from Lithuania. We've got quite a big program in Lithuania now. And really, it's just to say how simple this can be. The way Creative Partnerships works is schools apply to be in the program with a school issue they want to work on. They don't apply going, make us more creative. They go, we're worried about listening and speaking skills in year 1, or we're worried about in maths in year 6, or we're worried about the boys' behaviour in the playground, or our GCSE results in science are terrible. Will you come and help us with one of those issues? And we send a creative professional in who we've trained to work with those teachers to work out how to do that much more effectively. So in this school, the school has applied, and they're worried about as effectively the writing skills, the use of the alphabet by the kids. They're struggling to get on top of the alphabet, to use it properly, to relate the sounds to the letters and create things. And a sound artist comes in to work with them. And what they're doing here is that they're listening to the school, because the first thing the sound artist says is, just listen to the school. And they all lie there and they listen really hard to the school. And they start thinking about what they hear. Then they take them out of the school, they take them to the local railway station, and here they have to write down everything they hear. So the idea is you use letters to create the sounds you can hear everywhere around you. So they're all busy writing away. Then they go into a subway, and they're doing the same there. They go into an indoor market. In all these photographs, what comes across so strongly is the rapt concentration on what they're doing. And actually, they're doing, you remember this from school, the most boring bit was writing your letters. You know, it was just a nightmare. Here, they're having a ball doing it, absolutely engaged. Here, they're listening to a sculpture to work out what they sound like. And this, I really like this one. They took them to the local university to a Turkish class. None of them were Turkish, they'd never spoken Turkish, and they had to sit down and they had to write Turkish just by listening to the Turkish. And then they came back into, and then they went to the local theatre and they met the mayor. It is always very important to keep the politicians happy. So there's the happy politician. And then they came back into the classroom and they had to compare all the words that they'd come up with, and in doing so, select the ones which they think best captured all those sounds they heard whilst they were outside. And this is in Lithuanian. And at the top it says stotis, which is station. So it's the words they heard in the station. And the first word up there that they've written is chektikas. And that's the sound of a train coming through the station. Chektikas, 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 so forth. And sashash is the sound of the brakes of the train and so forth. And that's what they were doing all the way through. How do you convert these letters into sounds and create words? Then they came back into the classroom. As a final exercise here, they were given a series of paintings to select from. And they selected a painting, and then they had to create a soundtrack for that painting, just using sounds that they could write down and the mouth could make. And they then recorded these, and they became little sound installations, and this is one of them. And that was their idea of the sound of paradise. It was what they thought that painting was about. And immediately you go back to that slide I showed before and said it was challenging. Everybody could make a contribution because there weren't right answers, but then there was a debate about the best use of the letters. It felt incredibly authentic. They were out there in the community. They were in the railway station. They were in the markets. The organization of time was very flexible. It wasn't about bell-bound, but you could see them working in workshop arrangements in group. The result was very high profile. They showed these off to the whole school when they finished them. Emotion and feeling was a central part of what they did. They wandered all over town and so on and so forth. They were central to the learning. They were bringing things. Everyone could make a contribution, and you get there. So it's not hugely complicated to be able to do this. It's just a tiny little project. But this project's completely revolutionized this school because the impact on the kids was so enormous, and the way they came alive, the impact on their writing. And I visited the school, and the teacher was showing me all their writing books and all the stuff they'd done and how their literacy had moved on. The whole school and all the teachers are now working on saying, how do we apply this in different places? We get this. We can do this. It's not very difficult. And so that was the primary school. Now I'll give you an example from lower secondary school. This is in the UK. This is a maths project. The school asked us to work with a low-performing maths group, low-ability maths group, who were really struggling with their maths. And this is a short video about what they did.
My name's Fiona Johnson, and I'm an animator, and I've been working with pupils at Harrop Fold to engage them more in maths. So my part was to take over after the drama artist had actually worked with the children to look at different scenarios where math could actually take place. Then my job to take over that was to animate what they'd learnt. So we sort of created some dramas, and the animation part came in was to have some animation mixed in with the live action. So we took their graphs and their objects that they were animating. So for an example, one group were the Russian mafia, and their math problem was to drink as many shots of vodka as they could within a certain period of time. So they could measure the distance and speed of the vodka shot going from the table to the mouth and how many they could consume in that time. So they had a bar, set the bar up, and actually did that as a drama. Then the graph was actually animated with little vodka glasses to actually show how fast they could drink those vodka shots and how many. So it was looking at distance and speed. So it was just a creative way of getting them to be able to recall math problems, and because they, through drama and video and animation, they have to repeat that process over and over again, it becomes much better for them to actually recall and solve those problems. So all in all, after a sticky start and a few frustrations, they were absolutely great. So they've now produced 4 short films that look at distance and speed and working with graphs.
Having experienced the processes of creating an animation, we decided to produce one in-house in order to illustrate more of the key concepts of the maths curriculum. As an arts college, we're fortunate to have the facilities to be able to do this, as can be seen from the following example.
Welcome to Maths News. Today's story is very exciting. There is a crisis in the farming industry. Due to the lack of space in the countryside, farmers are having to relocate hen coops. We now hand over to our exceptional reporter, Alex, who is on the roof.
Thank you, Jasmine. We have been speaking to local eggs to find out exactly what has been happening.
It's cracking, mate.
I'm shell-shocked. It's awful, just awful.
Terrible, terrible, terrible.
We spoke to one of the relocated hens.
This is awful. 30 of my eggs have been scrambled on the pavement. I'd like to know what speed they fell at when they left that roof.
I spoke to an expert who had been working on the equation.
I used the equation distance divided by times equals speed. These were my findings.
The results show that the speed of the first egg drop was 9.8 meters per second. The second egg drop was 9.7 meters per second, and the third egg drop was 9.9 meters per second, giving an average of 9.8. In conclusion, the results show that the eggs should stay in the country. This is Alex reporting for Maths News.
I gave that a bit of space, but the most remarkable thing, because the video goes on for a bit, is the head teacher you see talking about how, having had the initial ideas from the animators, they then took it inside and started doing it themselves. Across the maths curriculum is by the end of the year, she says, that group scored more than the top abilities test, the top ability set in that school. It completely blew the school away. They just wanted them to do some maths, if you see what I mean. But the improvement in their scores that went with it was absolutely extraordinary. And the animator says it's partly because it makes endless repetition fun. You need to do that in the animation process. Therefore, you're really dealing with the mechanics of it, but you keep coming back to it, and the learning goes in, and it's very deep. And the final example here, this is now with some 16-year-olds. It's the biology curriculum that we've been asked to come in and work with. What we did is we put a theatre director and playwright in with the young people to work on the particular module which was of concern, which was about genetic diseases. So they wrote a play and performed a play about genetic diseases. And how interesting, I hear you all say. But in fact, it was really interesting because they imagined that the government had passed a law requiring all 16-year-olds to have blood tests. And if they were shown to be carrying genetic diseases, then they were compulsorily sterilized. And the play is about a 16-year-old girl who's not had the blood test and who's got pregnant, and she's now up in court because this was against the law. And the play is a courtroom drama. It takes place in the court. The kids play the judges, the lawyers, the witnesses, and so forth. And the lawyers for the defense are arguing that actually this is a matter of human rights. You can't, having a baby is a basic human right, whilst the prosecution is saying, what about the rights of the child, who's now going to be born with the diseases? What about the rights of the state, who are going to have to look after the child, and so on and so forth. So they really get engaged in the ethical issues. And I'll just show you the play performance they did started with a video which they also made, sort of setting the scene.
interrupt today's programme for a news flash. The World Council has announced a package of emergency legislation to help combat the financial crisis. Amongst these laws passed is a controversial act intended to rid the world of genetic disease. All 16-year-olds will be required to submit a blood sample for genetic testing. If they are found to have one of the list of a genetic disease, they will be sterilised. They will be sterilised.
So I show you that because essentially you're just looking at coursework there. But over those examples that I gave, you see the increasing complexity, the increasing technical skills that the young people are displaying in what they create, and also this interest in ethical issues. Because I strongly believe that if you can connect the teaching material with ethical issues, young people really engage, whatever age. They're really interested in ethics and morals and debating them. And again, the outcome of this project was this GCSE work. When they sat their biology GCSE on this module, they got, on average, 15% higher scores than they got on their other science modules. And so it keeps coming back to the fact that having a creative education is not instead of test scores, instead of results, or instead of the curriculum. It's about how you teach that. What impact does it have? We've done lots of research, and I'm not going to go into it now, but because of the scale of the program in England, we were able to do a lot of long-term research. So, for instance, we were able to show, by studying 13,000 young people who'd been through our programs and comparing them with 87,000 young people who had the same mix of social economic background and grades at the start, that despite coming from economically and socially challenged communities, young people who participated in creative partnerships activities outperform the national average at key stages 3 and 4, which in England is the test you take at 12 and 16. They would be predicted to be right at the bottom of those scores. They outperform the national average in what they do. We've been inspected by Ofsted, the school inspection process, twice, and Ofsted in 2010. This was about a bit like I'm sure your inspection service is very popular and extremely forward-looking, but in England it's not quite the case. When they came down in 2010 with this, it was like Moses coming down from Sinai. There is not a conflict between the national curriculum, national standards in core subjects, and creative approaches to learning. These examples were accompanied by better than average achievement and standards or a marked upward trend. Schools in challenging circumstances showed the greatest improvements. Improvements in literacy, particularly writing and speaking, were significant. Creative partnerships have demonstrated even the most reluctant pupils can be engaged. So the most challenging and difficult and conservative of our evaluation systems, if you like, the school inspection service, came out and said, actually, we've got to admit it, this works. It's not instead of, it's as well as, and it's what makes it work. We've also looked at the impact of this approach in education on parental engagement. We've also looked at truancy and attendance rates and so forth, and all of that's available from our website because it really is a massive amount that we did. But we've also been working on applying this more, because one of the key questions were the kids any more creative at the end? You know, we've got better tests, better behavior, better attendance. Were they more creative? This is a much more difficult area, and we're doing a lot more research at the moment with the OECD and SERI and the PISA people to look at whether we can create an assessment module, if you like, or an assessment method, trying to establish how creative young people are. And we've reached the stage where we've come up with some instruments which we're piloting, which will help us understand where kids are. It's formative in the sense it's a diagnostic tool. I don't think we're any near coming up with something summative, by which I mean you can compare the creativity of the kids in this school with the creativity in that school. But we're moving in this direction, and we're very interested in piloting this approach in combination with this, because this is our classroom diagnostic tool. We can use this to go into classrooms and work out how creative an environment there is, because this environment leads to creativity. We can then do the other form and say, how creative did we find the kids, and correlate these in order to get a view of where that school is. But is creative education just about better test results and improved behavior? And I think this is the final point that I want to make, because I think that this is the most important one. Going back to that school in Lithuania a minute, one of the things is that we work with teachers a lot on their own documentation. Find new ways to imaginatively document what goes on, and particularly using cameras a lot more in the classroom. Just photograph what's going on. They didn't notice this sequence until after it happened. But there was a boy in the class, he was Russian speaking, and he's a twin, and he'd been separated from his other twin and moved to a separate school because school was really not working for him, and it was felt that the twin relationship was at the heart of it. So he started in here, but he's really not happy about being in this class. And there he is, literally pulling a long face, and you can see as the kids begin working on this project, he's out there. This is the listening exercise from a different angle. You can see he's right at the right there. He's watching it, but he's absolutely not getting engaged in the process. This is the next time the artists are in, and he's now beginning to hover around the edges of this process, and he's doing little bits of work. This is the first time he's really engaged, but he's not doing it with anybody else. They then go out, and they do the exercise you've already seen. He's in the stripy hat, orange and blue there, and he's writing and writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. They never got this much work out of him. They come back into the classroom, and he's now in the green jumper here, and they're doing the group work, and he's now in there. He's right at the center, sharing his ideas, talking about how it's going to go. And this final exercise is that they're actually doing a little drama here, and they're having to read parts. And this was the first time he was ever willing to come out and take those risks. So that kind of projection is possible to evidence in your classrooms. There are ways of capturing those kind of stories and doing it. And a lot of time with, say, Ofsted inspectors coming in, and you go, oh, it's been absolutely brilliant because it did this. And you go, well, what's the evidence? There are new ways of capturing those moments. And there are new technologies which are able to do it. And I think this was a very powerful and very simple way in which they were able to do it. But also, I want to stress that thinking creatively is also dealing with concepts. Concepts is how we understand the world. And those concepts need to shift. They're never absolute, but it's how science operates. It observes and it creates a concept to explain what it observes. Later on, the observations change. You've got to rework the concept. But central to our connection with the outside world is the ability to be conceptual. And we don't give, I think, young people enough opportunity, certainly in England, to operate. This is a project we did in Holland. And after it, I was talking to the artist and said, what was your project about? And she said, it was about regrets. I said, regrets? Why did you do regrets? And she said, well, I'm about 35 and I've got a lot of regrets. And I said, well, what did the kids think about it? She said, they thought it was brilliant. They had no idea that adults had regrets. And it was a whole window into growing up, which they were able to go out and explore. And here they went out to an old people's home and they all interviewed people, but they talked to them about regrets. They went around the community in different ways. All these techniques are techniques which I know your schools will be using and so forth, of gathering evidence and so forth, but building it round the exploration of really quite complex concepts really motivates young people. And you get the writing and the thinking and everything else you want out of it because they're so much more motivated. This next example is about feeling. I was in a school the other day, and I was talking to a group of year sixes at a primary school in England. And I said, is it important that teachers do creative things in class? And this boy said, oh, it's really important. And I said, why? And he said, well, when my teacher's doing her normal teaching, she's got her grumpy face on. And then if I don't understand something, I don't want to ask because I don't think she's going to want to tell me. But when she's doing creative things, she's got her happy face on. And then I don't mind asking, and she never minds telling me. Now, what he was saying, and we were in this group with a lot of children, the head teacher from that school, and a number of teachers, and you could hear all the adults gasp as he said this, because what he was saying, translated, is, I moderate my learning behavior according to the emotions that my teacher is displaying. And most teachers try and pretend that's not true, but actually it happens all day. Everywhere in school there are emotions. A lot of the time people pretend that they're not there. This was a project we did in Austria, and the practitioner here comes in, has got a particular way of working. He brings in lots of big posters and magazines, and they cut out faces, and the kids put the faces on, and then they have to create a monologue around that which they perform, and then they have to write them because it's actually a literacy project, and it's to get them to write imaginatively and so on and so forth. So they go through this process and they do it. Now there was a boy, this was the boy, whose parents were getting divorced. And it was one of those really messy divorces where one partner had moved out, and it meant the other partner couldn't afford the house anymore, so she'd had to move into an apartment, but that meant the kid had to leave school, so he's gone to a different school, and he's lost all his friends. So life's a complete disaster. So he puts the mask on, and it comes to his turn, and this was his story. He said, I'm a man, and last night I was in the bar, and I had too much to drink, and I shouldn't have driven home, but I did. And unfortunately, on the way home, I ran over and killed my parents. But nobody saw, so I put the bodies in the bag, and I've taken them home and I've buried them in the garden, and nobody knows. But now everybody's being really nice to me because they realize my parents are missing and they're very concerned about me, but they don't realize I murdered them. Now, with boys of this age, it's very common when the families break up for them to feel, with boys and girls, that it's their fault, because their concept of family is them. These adults came together, had a family. What was family? It was me. And now they don't want to be family anymore. Why not? It's because they don't want me. And therefore they feel that they are to blame. What you get in a project like this is the ability for young people to put out there something they're really thinking about, but in a place that's safe, so that everybody can acknowledge what's going on without him saying, actually, I feel really bad about the divorce because I think it's my fault, because that conversation isn't really going to happen. And in putting it out there, it also puts it out in a space where the rest of the adults in the school can begin to deal with that. And they go, oh, I get it. If you're not able to do that, it builds up. There's no learning going to go on inside this boy whilst all that's bubbling along. You've got to be able to deal with it. Now, this is an extreme example, but that is going on. One of the features in English education now is this incredible difference between boys' achievement and girls' achievement by the age of 16. I think it's related to this because I think boys have problems with their emotions. We've created education as emotion-free zones. They don't know what to do with all this, and it just bubbles up. I have 4 kids who are a bit older now, and it was certainly true with them. The amount of emotion that flew around from them in the classroom was incredibly disruptive, and the school eventually asked them to go, and I understand why. But there wasn't space for all this place to go. And I think schools might say, I haven't got time to deal with that. You have to deal with it. If it's not going to be dealt with, nothing's going to happen. The final example is to come back to this ethical example. I want to show you the opening of a short film made in a project we did in Sweden, in Malmö, and then I'll tell you why I think it's important.
Förra veckan så pratade vi om känslor i klassen, och då kom vi in på en känsla som är rädsla. Och då fick ni rita en bild.
Och den här bilden, vad säger den då? Ja, och det står någonting här på baksidan. Viskningar från underjorden. En kniv, blodig kniv. Man blir rädd.
Vad är de här flickorna rädda för, Hanna? Det är du som har ritat den bilden.
Ja.
Vad är det du har ritat?
Det är några flickor som är ute och hör massa röster. Ibland när de får massa viskningar.
Klockan är jättemycket, så vi får gå ut på rast nu allihop.
Du hör? Vad händer? Du hör det sant? Eller hur?
vadå?
Ska jag säga vad hon sa?
Hon har snackat skit om en tjej.
Är det mig?
Ja.
Har du snackat skit om mig?
Nej.
Jo, du har.
Ego sätter.
Du vill inte sätta
Om jag inte vet... Lyssna!
sätt dig ner!
Now, there's two things about that film which are amazing. First of all, it's a film the kids created, wrote, conceived of, and then they made with professional filmmakers, performing it in the end. Now, that first sequence of that class, what's amazing about it is they know absolutely how to perform one of those disengaged Friday afternoon arts projects in which none of them are really engaged. They know how to do it, and I met them afterwards, and I said, how did you learn how to behave so badly? And they said, oh, we know how to perform bad, trust me. But it's that sense and understanding that I think children and young people have of basic pedagogy and the dynamics of it, that they're able to reproduce bad teaching and learning absolutely perfectly whenever they choose. And that's very undermining a lot of times. But much more important, it was a film about fear. They decided to make a film that explored fear at different levels. Over the autumn term, they did a lot of exercises. They thought about fear from different directions. And whilst they were going through this, there was a gunman loose in Malmo who started shooting immigrants dead in the street at random. Nobody knew who he was. He'd appeared, shoot people dead, he'd disappear. So if you're an immigrant child, and all the children in this school come from an immigrant background, the thing you were most frightened about was being shot dead. It was the most dominant thing. Now, when it came to making the film, they did not make, they could easily have made a film about this terrible gunman who was shooting people, that was very scary, and he was evil and they were good, but they didn't. The only reference to the film, to the gunman in the film, is it's called Targets, and the word target is used to describe someone who's bullied. And the point that the kids are making is that the gunman was a bully, and bullying starts in all of us, and unless we get to understand and stop bullying ourselves, we're never going to stop the gunman. And therefore, it was about them and the way they needed to change. There's a very famous German film called The Confessions of Winifred Wagner. And it's a long interview with Winifred Wagner, who's the granddaughter of Wagner and was a close friend of Hitler's. And the film is this long interview, more or less head or shoulders, in which Winifred Wagner talks about Hitler coming round after work, and he always used to go upstairs and read stories to the kids, and after that he would come downstairs and they'd sit round the piano and play old German folk songs and so forth. Never mentions the war. Never mentions the concentration camps, because the point the film is making is we all think we can stop Hitler coming again because we know what he's going to look like. He's going to have funny black hair and a little moustache, but actually he's the person next door. Now there's a group of 12-year-olds faced with the same moral, ethical question, comes to the same conclusion. We get a lot of politicians in the South, in England, talking about, oh, you know, we want kids to grow up with strong moral and ethical frameworks. They will naturally, if you give them the framework in which to explore those issues, they will come to the conclusions you most want them to do. In England, one of the set texts at GCSEs is Lord of the Rings. You all know Lord of the Rings. The paradigm is that, so the story is that plane crashes, all the adults are kids, and kids are left on the island, and kids turn into what they will do if they're left without adult supervision, which is murderers and cannibals. Now, I fundamentally dispute that paradigm. I think given the space, young people will grow up to be moral and ethical people, but they need the space and they need the skills, and that is what putting creativity at the heart of education is all about. It is reverting education back to that vision of growing up whole people capable of having full and exciting lives, and that is why Education Scotland is absolutely right to want to put creativity back at the heart of education. Thank you very much, all of you.